Hello, Culinary 2 students. So today I want to go over our individual pot pies that we are going to be making in class. So as you can see right here, I have our ingredients broken down into three parts. So the first part I have is the crust, and then the velouté sauce, and then the filling. So if we go down, you will also see that I have this broken up into 2-day parts because this will be a 2-day lab. We cannot get this all done in one day. So the first day will be a lot of mise en placing and prepping for day 2. So on day 1, you can see you are going to be prepping the potatoes. So the first thing you'll need to do, scrub the potato, obviously, because we want to get all the dirt and anything off of it, and then dice it, and then place it in boiling water. The reason why we would dice it before we place it in the boiling water so it cooks faster. Potatoes can take a long time to get soft, and we don't have time. So we want to make sure that we get our potatoes to the point where they're considered fork tender. So you'll see that term right here in the recipe. And the term fork tender means if you were to take a fork and insert it into the potato, it goes in very easily. It's not going to resist it. But we don't want to overboil the potato to the point where if we were to insert the fork, it just falls apart. So we kind of want to watch that fine balance there. Once we get our potatoes to the point where they are fork tender, we will drain the water, let the potatoes cool, and then we will place them in a plastic bag. One other thing to remember when you're dicing up your potatoes is remember these are going to be in little ramekins. So the ramekins are going to be about this size, maybe a little bit bigger. So, we don't want huge chunks of potatoes because we don't want that to overpower the pot pie. The next thing is going to be our filling. And our filling is going to consist of chicken and then a mixture of mixed vegetables, the potatoes, and then the velouté sauce. So the chicken, I am actually going to buy pre-cooked and already diced up. You guys have already proven to me that you know how to safely cook chicken when we did our quesadillas. So that's just going to be one thing that I'm going to take out of the equation for you. So you don't have to worry about trying to cook up another thing on day 1 or even day 2. So you'll just measure out your chicken. You'll measure out the mixed vegetables. You will place those in the same bag as your cooked potatoes once they've cooled off. Then you'll label that plastic bag with your name, your hour, and your cohort. You want to make sure that all the air has been removed from that bag. What will happen is if you have any air in there, your potatoes are going to turn really black and grayish, kind of not a really good looking color. So we want to make sure we get all that air out of those plastic bags. The last thing you are going to have to do really to prepare is going to be your crust. Now this is going to be a pastry crust, and some of you maybe are not familiar or haven't ever made a pastry crust before. And so when you're making a pastry crust, the first thing you'll do is measure out your flour and your salt in a mixing bowl. Then the next part is you'll cut in butter. Now some people when they're making a pie crust or a pastry crust is they will use a shortening. We're going to use butter, and you're going to cut it in. But some of you might be like, okay, hold up, wait a minute. What does cut in mean? All right. Well, cut in means to basically break up that butter or shortening into really, 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 really small, fine pieces. All right. Almost to the point where it resembles cornmeal. And there's 3 ways that you can do that. The first way is to use a pastry blender. And what that is, we have those in our kitchens. They have like a little metal handle, and then it comes down with a bunch of metal wires. All right. If you don't have that, you can use a fork to kind of smash it around and break it up, or butter knives to kind of, again, work it. Any way works as long as it gets broken up. Then you are going to add cold water into that mixture. Now, there's something that you have to keep in mind once you start adding the water. There's a protein in our grains, so the flour, that gets activated once it comes in contact with liquid, and that is called gluten. Some of you have probably heard of gluten. It's a popular buzzword now, gluten allergies, gluten intolerance. So what gluten is, it provides the structure to our baked goods. Think of like banana bread, muffins, those kind of things. Okay. We find it in our pastry crust. And what gluten does is, again, it gives it structure. So think of like really cheap bubble gum that you maybe had as a child, that pink bubble gum, it comes in the yellow wrapper. You pop it in and, it's pretty good the first couple seconds and it's really easy to chew. But what happens after a couple seconds? It gets really tough. It gets really hard to chew, right? Loses its flavor. And if you were to take it out of your mouth and go to like stretch it, it just snaps. Well, that's kind of how gluten is. When it first comes in contact with water, it's fine. It's nice and stretchy. But the more you stir it or the more you work with it, it gets really tough. And we don't want that. Think of a muffin. All right, you want it to be really nice and fluffy. All right, we want our pie crust to be really flaky and tender. Tender means to kind of, melt in your mouth. So that's how we want it to be. Well, if we overwork our gluten by over stirring it, handling it too much, our pie crust is going to be really dense and really tough. It won't get golden brown. So when you start adding the water, be careful that you don't over mix it. All right. And you don't add too much water at a time either. All right. So just 1 tablespoon at a time. And you want it to add it just until it starts to form together. All right. Once you get your dough to form together, I want you to put it so it's like a flat pancake, like a disc. That way, when you come back for your second in-class day, it'll be easier to roll out than if we were to make it into a ball. So then you'll wrap that in plastic wrap. And again, you'll label that. Your names, your hour, and your cohort. And then the last thing that you will do, so a lot of things to do on day 1, you're going to just prep things for your velouté sauce. All right. So for the velouté sauce, for your measuring out, you're just going to measure out your butter and your flour. Also put that in a plastic bag, label it. So you're going to have 3 things that you're going to put in the bin. Your potatoes with your chicken and mixed vegetables, your crust, and that's in the shape of a disc, and your velouté. Again, with your crust, make sure that you don't overwork that gluten. All right. Then on day 2 is also going to be a very busy day. You will come in and I will already have your ovens preheated to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. It's super important that somebody comes in and starts working on the velouté sauce right away. All right. Because this takes some time and we cannot rush the velouté sauce. I guess I cannot stress that enough. It will take time and we cannot rush it. If you rush it, you'll end up with a soupy mess and it just won't turn out. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to combine that butter and flour in a saucepan over medium to low heat. And you want to keep stirring because we don't want to burn that flour and that butter. And you want to go for about 3 to 5 minutes with that because we want to cook out the starchiness of the flour. All right. And so what you have done there is you have made a roux. All right. So then you'll take some chicken stock or some chicken broth, which I will have made for you. And you will add just a little bit at a time. If we were to take all that chicken broth and add it all at once, again, it wouldn't absorb and it would just be a soupy mess. Add a little bit at a time, let it incorporate, let it absorb. All right. It should be about the consistency of mashed potatoes as you're going. And then after you get it all added in, it should be kind of like a thin mashed potato consistency. Once you have your velouté done, you're going to add your filling to it. And then this is going to be different than your typical pot pie. Your normal pot pies, you have a crust on the bottom, a filling, and then a crust on the top. But these are different. We're just going to have our filling on the bottom, and then we're just going to have a crust on the top. So while one person is making the velouté, another person can be rolling out their crust, making sure that there will be enough to overhang on the sides a little bit. I said about 1/8 of an inch. You don't want a ton hanging over, but you don't want it to be, too short because it will shrink as it bakes. So you'll fill it, with your filling, and then you'll cut so you have your crust overhanging a little bit. Then you want to score the top Basically what scoring means is that you're going to cut some slits into the top to let some steam escape. All right. Then we want to take a baking sheet, place our ramekins on top of our baking sheet in case we have any spillage of our filling. And then we want to bake it for 10 to 15 minutes. Now, remember, our crust and our filling, those have been in the refrigerator for over a day, so they're going to be a little cold. I will have taken them out prior, but it might take a little bit more than 10 to 15 minutes, so we might have to gauge that as best as we can. So we want to make sure that we're keeping an eye on it, and we are, looking for it to get golden brown or cooked through. It might not get golden brown if we overworked our gluten, though, so keep that in mind as well. So this is going to be a busy lab. So it's super important that we know what we're doing, we understand the recipe, and we come ready to go. And remember, it's okay to get started on the lab before the bell rings. So get your hairnet on or your hat, get your apron on, get in the classroom, get your station cleaned, sanitized, wash your hands, and start getting your ingredients, because you will need every second of this lab so you can, especially on day 2, finish so you can enjoy your warm chicken pot pie. All right. Make sure if you have any questions that you reach out to me beforehand so I can answer those before lab day. All right.